Why is California's new law establishing a $20 minimum wage for fast food establishments so bad? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that has long brought you all the principled, uncompromising case for the libertarian philosophy. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel, former president of the Foundation for Economic Education, and former Ludwig von Mises professor of economics at Hillsdale College, and former professor at University of Dallas, where we met, Richard.
Correct. Long time ago, in an earlier century. That's the 20th, not the 19th.
All right. Well, now, speaking of the olden days, Richard, a long time has gone by since you and I met each other. And one of the issues that has just always persisted with us, which is so amazing to me, is the minimum wage. And I just read an article where Panera's Bread in California is being accused of having finagled an exemption in the law that was enacted there, raising the minimum wage to $20 an hour. And apparently somebody slipped a provision in there with some technical thing that said somebody that bakes bread there is exempt from the law or something. And so they're saying, oh, this is the Panera exception, and they used influence to get an exemption from this thing. But Richard, what amazes me is that, ever since we met back in the 1980s, we've made powerful arguments as to why the minimum wage is so destructive. And what amazes me is that there's still people around in a big way that honestly believe that this is the key to raising standards of living. That all you have to do is enact a law, and man, the standards of living of people in a society are going to go up. This is the way we legalize, better, improved working conditions and better wages and so forth. Just pass a law. Well, if that's the case, why are there poor nations in the world? I mean, there's some really poor nations. So I don't understand why the word hasn't gotten to them that all you have to do to eliminate poverty in your nation, especially among the working class, is just enact a minimum wage of $20 an hour. I mean, why hasn't that message gotten to those poor nations if all that's needed? And then the other question I have, Richard, is why do they always limit it to $20? Why not raise it to $100 an hour, $1,000 an hour? I mean, just think, we could have everybody become millionaires in this country. The poorest people could become millionaires if we had an hourly rate of $1,000 an hour. Well, I think even the proponents of minimum wage would see that as ridiculous. They would say, well, nobody's going to pay the $1,000. Jacob, that's ridiculous, $1,000 an hour. And so we can't make it that high. But what they don't realize, Richard, is that no matter where they put this minimum wage, there's always going to be people that are going to be priced out of the labor market. At $1,000 an hour, everybody would be priced out. There'd be massive unemployment. And the proponents of this kind of economic intervention can easily see that. But even at $20 an hour, they're pricing people out of the labor market whose labor is valued at less than that 20. And I don't know whether Panera Bread did this or not, but what Panera Bread is saying is, you enforce this law against us and all these other fast food places, they're going to be laying people off. And that's the cause of chronic unemployment in this country. What do you think, Richard?
Well, let me sort of just add one or two more details as I understand it from this Panera Bread case in California. Governor Newsom seems to be a friend of the man who owns Panera Bread. And this fellow has given significant sums of money to support Newsom's elections in the past through PAC support, and as well as a personal contribution to the campaign, the one-to-one contribution, which has a certain maximum to it. He has also supported the Democratic Party with huge sums of money. Now, of course, Newsom has insisted, this is just a coincidence. I mean, we were looking at the technicalities of, how would this law fit best in certain parts of the fast food market, but not others. But it is very clear that the way that they phrased it, the exemption from the $20 an hour minimum wage would virtually only apply to Panera Bread because it specifies a fast food place where the bread is baked and sold itself on the premises, as opposed to like a McDonald's where they don't make the bread on site. It's baked someplace else and brought in to make the burgers and the breakfasts. So as a consequence, this is a way of not referring to Panera Bread, but phrasing the exemption in such a way that it only applies more or less to that special interest group that benefits the governor in a variety of ways. Now, I would just mention, just before I make my comments about the minimum wage, this is not unique. You can go through many pieces of not just state, but especially federal legislation that goes through Congress. And there's always a phrasing of the clauses applying in this case, applying in that case, modified application here, exemption there. And it never says an exemption for Joe Schmo who supported Congressman X in the last election. But it's always a phraseology that ends up being an exemption that clearly is only towards either a very narrow set of producers or even a single producer as the legislation would be impacting. So basically, this is a gimmick that politicians use to give favors, gifts, subsidies, exemptions to their buddies to keep the campaign contributions continuing rolling in for their reelection. Now, having said that, that's sort of the background. But of course, like Newsom says, I'm shocked that anyone thinks this. Because I love the people. The fact is that what is the consequence, which you were getting at about the minimum wage? The fact is, as I've expressed it before, and there's only so much logic to this. Which one of us pays more for something than we think it's worth, or what we personally can afford to pay? I go into a department store looking for a shirt, a pair of pants, a jacket, whatever, and I look at, is this what I'm looking for? The style, the color, it's a summer jacket, a winter jacket, and so on and so forth. And then, given that it seems interesting to me, I look at the price tag, and there can be two responses on the price tag. Well, three response to price tag. A, yeah, this is what I'm looking for, and it's a price I'm able to pay and I'm willing to pay. That is, what is the opportunity cost of my buying the jacket as opposed to something else that also has a value to me? I prefer spending the money on the jacket more than I would have improved my circumstances, more satisfied what I'm doing in life by spending it in another direction. Or, well, I like the jacket, but I just can't afford it, given either just the income constraint or the opportunity costs in other directions. Or I don't think it's worth it. There are a lot of things that a person may like and desire and want, but they just basically say when they see what it would cost them to buy, the price tag, I don't think it's worth it. It's desirable, but not what I'd have to give for it. It's not worth it. It's just not of that significance of value. Now, we all take this view every day, though we don't consciously have in our mind, but it's there. Now, why do you expect that a businessman is any different? He has only one source of income out of which he can pay those who he employs to help him manufacture and market and sell a product. And that is the revenue he earns from the customers who purchase it. He has to be making a speculative estimate. Since all production takes time, you produce today over a period of time, and then it's something to sell at some point in the future. He has to make a speculative judgment. What do I think consumers want? What qualities, features, and characteristics? What price might they be willing to pay for this particular item? And if I price it at this, given a whole array of different consumers, what is the total amount I'd be able to sell? And then given the number of whatever it is that I think I could sell, and I multiply that by the price at which I think I can sell each one, what is the total revenue I'm going to earn? Now, this total revenue certainly is the maximum, the limit that caps how much he could afford to spend on buying the capital equipment, the resources, renting or buying a factory or leasing it, and hiring workers. And he has to ask himself, do the revenues justify incurring these expenses when I have the expenses up front and the sales revenue only in the future? And second of all, I can try to make this product in different ways. Let's suppose I choose this combination: machinery, tools, and the labor to work with it. Will this be of greater or lesser expense in its totality than if I use a different combination of labor and machinery, labor and capital, as the economist likes to say? And then, given this, he says, well, let us suppose that I were to hire one more worker. What would he add to my output? And what would be the value of that output? In other words, if he enables me to make 3 more units, and I can sell each of those units at price X, that's my extra revenue by hiring him. 1 worker, 3 additional units of output times the price, that's the extra revenue I'll make from hiring him. But what will I have to pay him? Will I have to pay a wage in the marketplace that is greater or less than the extra revenue I'd earn from the extra output that his presence in my firm would enable me to manufacture? So he has to compare those two things. In other words, at the margin, does the extra cost does the extra revenue justify the extra cost? When the extra cost of hiring that worker, given the output he could assist me to produce and the value that it would have to sell, if that cost is greater than that revenue, I don't hire him. Or if for whatever reason the cost rises or the price goes down and I have to make a different calculation of that, I'm going to say, maybe I can't hold on to this worker anymore. As a consequence of this, all other things held the same. When the government raises the minimum wage from, let's say, $15, which California has been doing, to now $20, at the margin, the employer is going to have to say, in labor-intensive employments, is this worker worth me paying an extra $5 an hour for him than I've already been paying him? Or maybe at that higher marginal expense, he's not worth it. I'm going to have to let him go. Or, you know what? I wanted to sort of add some workers to try to take advantage of a market opportunity. But at this higher labor cost of an extra $5 an hour from 15 to 20, I'm not going to hire him. Now, who are the people most frequently affected by this? Unskilled or lower skilled workers. It's not going to be the person who's been on the job for 20 years, the person with a college degree, someone who has a particular skill or ability whose value will remain above that higher minimum wage. It's the person whose value is less than that. The high school dropout, the person who's had little or no work experience on the job so far. Then if those people have these low skills that already make them not very valuable from the employer's perspective anyway, and now you raise the cost of giving them a job or keeping them in that job, you're locking them out of even being at the bottom rungs of that ladder of success. Because unless you give them an option to be able to get the skills that over time may make them more valuable for an employer to be worth him in terms of a higher salary, you're locking him out permanently, and therefore into a life of poverty. And poverty that's going to either put him on welfare and or other avenues of a less legal and more crime-related activity. That's the choice we're facing. They talk about helping those in most need. You're pricing out of the market some of the very people who you say you want to help because you're making it less worthwhile, less profitable, less cost efficient to give that person the job that you say you're concerned about. And therefore, it is counterproductive, it is harmful, it is undesirable, and affects the very minority or low-income groups that you say you're most sincerely concerned about.
Boy, you raised a lot of great points. Let me go back to your point about government officials doing favors for their constituents or their supporters. You know, you hear a lot about that in Latin America, you know, corruption, or in European countries too. I mean, there's corruption in the government, there's corruption in the government, and you have candidates running saying, I'm going to end the corruption, I'm going to end the corruption. But really, it's a variation of the theme of we got to get better people in public office. And as you and I have argued, that's a fool's errand. I mean, you're always going to find people that are doing favors for other people. That's how they get their support. And so the problem is a systemic problem. It's not a better people problem. And as you and I have long argued for decades, that we need to just separate economy and the state. That if you get government out of the business of doing good things for people or bad things to people, then you don't have the incentive to make campaign contributions anymore or have lobbyists or whatever. If government can't give out largesse, what's the point of having a lobbyist in Washington to lobby for largesse? So that really is the ultimate key here. Now, you raised a really good point that I want to expand upon about the entrepreneurship that goes, the relationship to minimum wage. We often think of existing businesses when we think about minimum wage and their ability to pay this higher wage or lay off workers. There's also another factor here, and that's like you take an inner city guy that wants to start a business, and he has nothing, very little capital, but he's got a lot of young people in the neighborhood that says, hey, look, guys, I'll pay you $2 an hour till I get my business going and stuff. And there's people there say, yeah, we're willing to work for $2. We'll help you start the business. We can learn how to start a business, whatever. He can't get his foot off that. I mean, he can't start climbing that ladder on that first rung because he is required to pay all those kids in that neighborhood $20 an hour. So that business never comes into existence, Richard. And then another point I want to make is, there's been a chronic unemployment rate among Black teenagers for years upon years. And people scratch their heads saying, why is this? Why is this? Well, it's exactly for the reason that you and I are talking about in this show. That for whatever reason, an employer will look at a Black teenager that maybe doesn't have really nice clothing, doesn't have a great education. He's going to inner city public schools, but the kid wants to work. And so he comes over to the white employer, big businesses, I'm willing to work. And the employer says, well, you're just not worth $20 an hour to me. I'd love to hire you, but I can't. And the reason he can't is because if he hires him at, let's say, $10 an hour, he can get fined like triple the amount of the wage. I mean, it's an enormous fine. And it operates as 100% disincentive to paying somebody less because the employee can work there for a year and then go turn in his employer, and he gets all this windfall of money, like triple the wages and so forth. So the Black teenager says, well, look, I'll do the same work as that white kid over there, my age. I'll do it for $7 an hour. Just give me a chance to get in here, save a little money, learn the business. The guy says, I would love to do it because I'm paying that white kid $15 an hour. I'd love to hire you at $7 an hour, but I can't do it because it's illegal. And so that's how they end up locking out of the labor market all these Black teenagers that, as you point out, then what are they supposed to do? They, in these formative years where they should be learning a work skill, work ethic, how to treat customers, the customer's always right, that kind of mentality that goes into the business world, they don't ever learn it. And so they hit their 20s, and what are they supposed to do? Well, they go on welfare. That's the classic response. People go on welfare. We're there to take you. Oh, you're unemployed. Okay, just stay there the rest of your life. Or you go into the drug trade. And young, look how many young Blacks are in the drug trade. Then they get busted and they get sent away to a penitentiary for 10, 20 years of their lives. They come out and situations even worse than before. So I guess the bottom line in all this, Richard, is good intentions don't matter when it comes to this type of work. No matter how well intended these people, the proponents of the minimum wage, might be, their good intentions are meaningless. When they're putting people out of business and they're putting businesses out of business, because there's a lot of businesses that say, we can't deal with this. We might as well just go out of business. And that's what's happened when they've raised the minimum wage. What good are those good intentions at this point? And let me make one final point here. There's a lot of businesses that pay. Oh, well, let me back up a minute. The justification for this intervention is that if you don't have it, employers are greedy, rapacious, capitalist swine who will always just pay a subsistence wage. And so you have to force them to pay $10, $15, $20, because if you don't, if you repeal the minimum wage, which is what we advocate, it would drop down to $1. They would just pay $1. Really? Okay, why is it then that some businesses pay more than the minimum wage? I mean, there's countless businesses that are paying more than $20 an hour. Why? If they're so rapacious and greedy and they're only going to pay subsistence wages, because this is what the market is demanding. When there's a scarcity of labor and there's a big demand for labor, that's what zooms wages up. And then when it's the opposite, then employers say, well, okay, we're going to pay less, but at least the person has a job. If you put that artificial minimum there, the person is locked out of the labor market, as we're talking about. I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, let me just sort of make 2 points. I want to talk about your last point first. You know, I was saying that if you set the minimum wage too high, you price people out of the market and therefore cause this type of unemployment among low income, low skilled groups. But to highlight your point, let us suppose that there is a person who is estimated by some employer to have a value added. That is, what will he contribute as an input to making something that he can sell? Let's suppose it would be $15 an hour. But he says, you know, I don't like you for whatever reason that it might be. It could be religious, it could be racial, whatever reason. I don't like you. And you know what? I wouldn't even think of paying you more than $7 an hour. Now, is that person stuck in that? That's your argument. You know, he'll get away with as low as he can pay. But if there's an open competitive market with other rivals competing against that employer, also wanting to produce and market a product with the profit motive of getting revenues, that other competing employer is going to say, you know something? He's hiring that work at $7 an hour. But, you know, I value him also at $15 an hour. You know, if I had a guy like him, I could make a product and sell it for $15 an hour, for $15. A revenue equal to that $15. So you know what? I've decided, and of course this is implicit in people, I don't care what his religion is. I don't care what his racial background is. I don't care if when he's at home, he kicks his dog and picks his nose. I don't care what it is. He can do something for me. I'm going to hire him away and I'm going to pay him $8 an hour. And then he draws him away. But then that first employer saying, well, you know, he's stealing away a better worker. I'm going to lose business, market share, profits. Okay, I'm going to hold my nose. Don't go to him. I'll pay you $8.50. No, $9. No, wait a minute, $10. The market is two-sided competition. And at the end of the day, there always will be people in the marketplace, precisely because they're in the pursuit of profit, who will say, at the end of the day, there's only one color that matters, the color of your money. What will you assist me in earning by employing you and paying you a little bit more than the other guy? Because even by paying you a little bit more, I still have a net gain from bringing you into my workforce. And then the other guy has to respond. So in the limit, the market wage that has to be paid to him has to be more or less converging to what the competing entrepreneurs estimate to be the value added of that worker. So the value of the worker is equal to the value of his labor. And as a consequence, the market overcomes these prejudices and biases very much. The other element that
Richard,
yes.
If you just permit me to interrupt you, because I want to just build on the point you made. And then you can go to this other point, but it's the racial bigotry aspect too. That let's assume you've got a bigoted employer and he's faced with two choices, a white kid and a black kid, and he has to pay them both $15 an hour under the law. So who's he going to choose? He's going to choose the white kid. I mean, he's a bigot, okay? But without minimum wage laws, the black kid can say, I'll work for $10 an hour, $8 an hour. And that's what gives an edge to the black kid. That's what breaks down the racial barriers, because the employer is saying, darn, I could take home to my spouse and kids a lot more profit if I hired the black kid. Oh, now there's a price for my bigotry. The minimum wage eliminates that price on the bigotry.
Yeah, and in fact, that gets to my second point. Maybe some of our viewers and listeners are familiar with the very famous free market economist Thomas Sowell, uh, authored many books, used to have a syndicated column. He's now in his mid-90s. But he has often highlighted the fact that if you go back to the 1930s and 1940s, when Roosevelt had implemented a minimum wage, but it was very low, and as inflation, particularly in the immediate post-World War II period, sort of lowered the real value of the cost of hiring workers, but the minimum wage hadn't been checked up by Congress. So the minimum wage was virtually of no real impact on anything. What you go back, Sol has said, and you look at the employment data from those years, the 1940s, what you find is that Black youth unemployment is either equal to or even less than white youth unemployment. And why was it that case? Because an employer who had some racial prejudices would have to decide, shall I hire the white kid at that $3 an hour, what would have been maybe a wage back then, or will I hire this Black kid and he's going to work for $2 an hour? How am I, what is more important, my racial prejudice or the extra money? And the fear that that my competitor might hire him as well instead of me and gain some of my market share. So as a consequence, price competition gives options to those who are suffering from such discriminations. Now, in a perfect world, you can say, but a person should be judged by the color of his skin or his religion, or whether he eats meat or is a vegetarian. Of course not, in this perfect imaginary world. But we're operating in the real world with real people who are guided by their preferences and values and likes and dislikes. And sometimes those likes and dislikes might be one that we don't agree with or consider even absurd, but they act on them. And the way to overcome their biases, their prejudices, the discriminatory motives is to give the person who's the victim of that a competitive edge to overcome it. And I would argue, as you were just alluding to, when that advantage can be taken advantage of, and now you hire the discriminated minority members into your employment because of the wage differential that makes it attractive to do so, even in the face of your own biases, you know what? People are interacting. They're working with each other day by day. They go on their lunch breaks or their coffee breaks, and inevitably you end up talking to the other guy because he's just there. And you know what? You find out that he's not much different than you. He has the same family problems. He's trying to make ends meet. He likes the same baseball team, go, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that very mixing of people that arises through an open competitive market because of these incentives and cost options that we're talking about results in the long run breaking down the very prejudices that made the wage differential necessary to allow those people to have a chance in the marketplace.
Okay, well, with that excellent insight, we're about out of time, so we'll wrap things up. Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks for your great support of FFF. If you're new to FFF, you're just getting exposed to what we do with this video, come and visit us at fff.org. Subscribe to our FFF Daily, which we consider and we strive to make the finest commentary page on the internet on a daily basis from a libertarian perspective. We got a monthly journal that Richard writes for every month called Future of Freedom. So we'll come and invite you to visit us to get the principled and compromising case for libertarianism, which is what we've done for some 34 years. Richard, as always, I greatly enjoyed the conversation and the visit, and I look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.